All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Weidman, and today I'll be presenting my Capstone Project on evaluation and community-based development work that is both participatory and formative. So formative relates to the goal of the evaluation being to improve a program as opposed to summative. So you can think of when you're cooking food and you taste it while you're in the process of cooking as opposed to waiting to see the result at the end. And then when I say participatory, I mean engaging community stakeholders who are the most affected by a project in the actual evaluation process, as well as the resulting decision making to varying extents. And we'll dig into that a little bit deeper. So to explain some of the motivations for this project, I wanted to read a brief excerpt from a longer poem titled Evaluation Considerations. It's written by Nicole Bowman, and I think it puts very powerfully the importance of participatory approaches to evaluation, as well as making cultural considerations throughout the evaluation. So she writes, consider how the evaluator determines many things before, during, and after the project, including the following list. This is not an exhaustive list either. Who is heard and who is voiceless or silenced, what is focused on and what is not included, the design and method used or not used, the data identified and collected or missed and even ignored, who interprets and what gets interpreted, or what is excluded from the interpretation, how interpretations are made or are not ever checked for validity and accuracy with community members, whose interpretations are valued as scientific and educational knowledge, and whose are not valued, not present, and or not even considered real data, what conclusions are drawn, or are not member checked for accuracy, how the conclusions are presented or published, or are not presented in the literature, or are presented without consent, who has access and control over the data once the study is done, or who is powerless to access, control, and own their community's evaluation data. And based on evaluation data, what policies, programs, and other initiatives continue to get funded, or not funded, discontinued as programs, or who have policies that are ill-informed. All of these evaluation decisions have profound and direct impact on the long-term struggles, challenges, and unsolved issues that communities and people face. So these are some considerations that I had in mind, as well as my client organization for the Capstone Project. I've been working with a nonprofit organization called Spark Microgrants that works on community-driven development in East Africa. And their model pairs a microgrant and capacity building with communities through a facilitated collective action process, or FCAP, which drives their methodology and the trainings that they go through with communities through the process of setting goals that they want to work towards and identifying projects that they can collaborate on in order to achieve those goals, and monitoring and evaluating their own projects, as well as continuing the process and recycling those funds for future projects to continue the community's own development. So Spark is interested, as they continue to scale up and build both the capacity of community partners and local facilitators, in incorporating more stakeholder engagement in the evaluation of their ongoing work with communities and their FCAP process itself. So when I began to research methodology on participatory evaluation, I found that there's no right way to do participatory evaluation. There's no step-by-step method, there's no guide that will take you through everything that you should do. Rather, it's grounded in principles, and the principles that the organization and the evaluator use in engaging with key stakeholders. And it really varies in terms of the depth and type of participation. So it varies along these three axes as depicted in this image of who has more control over the evaluation process on a spectrum from it being completely evaluator-driven to completely controlled by community stakeholders. It also varies based on who is selected for participation in the evaluation, and even how those individuals or groups are selected to be involved. And then finally, the depth of participation. So whether people are consulted, or you're collecting data from stakeholders, or if they're participating in a deeper way throughout different phases of the evaluation process. So the next phase of the Capstone Project was a content analysis of case studies that were relevant to inform the recommendations for Spark, for them to apply and integrating them into their own practice. And one part of the content analysis of the cases that I found, all of which were working on community-based development projects in East Africa in the past 20 years. All 11 that I found involved community stakeholders in the data collection phase, but very few, as you can see, involved community stakeholders from beginning to end, and even fewer in the initial planning phases of the evaluation and the resulting decision making. So the key takeaway for my client is that in order to really capitalize on the key advantages of participatory evaluation, there's a huge opportunity here to close that feedback loop and engage the community stakeholders in more steps of the evaluation process, which will lead to ground the evaluation in more community knowledge and more of the local context from designing through course correction and decision-making phases. And that can allow the people that are most affected by these development projects to have more of a say in how the program continues to evolve. Thank you very much.
Points for time. Any questions? Why does this matter?
Oh, great. I had hoped that would be clear. One thing that stuck out in my final reading of this poem that gave me a little bit of chills is the decision-making by funders and how that can influence programs and development projects specific to communities. So I was reflecting on the work that I used to do before coming to the MDP with an organization called the Two Seats Network, which also does incredible work in East Africa and Tanzania, and realizing that there would have been an opportunity if more of the community partners that we had worked with were involved in the evaluation process and presenting of results directly. Maybe that would have influenced the decision-making of donors that we were reporting out to in our monitoring and evaluation, and maybe they wouldn't have pulled the plug on the project. So maybe the evaluation would have been stronger, as well as maybe it would have been more effective if that information was communicated more directly from the key stakeholders really in the project to the people who ultimately had the decision-making power about whether or not to continue. Also, why it's important to my client, Spark, is that a key advantage of participatory evaluation is that it builds the capacity of both staff members and the community stakeholders as well, which will have positive benefits for the communities continuing to monitor and evaluate their own projects, as well as for the community members, as well as the local facilitators, to improve the process, to make it work better for them and make it more self-sustaining in the long term. So that's really, I think, why it matters most to them.
It seems like this is geared towards qualitative evaluations. Can you talk a little bit how it can be applied to more quantitative evaluations?
Yeah, absolutely. So something else that I looked at in the content analysis were all of the different types of methods used in order to inform my recommendations for Spark. And there were quantitative methods used as well. So individual interviews and surveys and questionnaires were the most common forms of data collection, which both lend themselves to statistical analysis. So yeah, that can certainly be done. And I believe 2 or 3 of the case studies did do a full statistical analysis. So actually, yeah, it's a common critique that this type of evaluation would be less rigorous, but that's actually not necessarily the case, especially if you're building capacity of everyone who would be involved in conducting the evaluation. So also it can add a lot of richness to what emerges in the evaluation, and that's what the cases that I was reading had found as well. That even if, it requires more resources to go into it, and you can also get more out of it. So I think that the field goes more in that direction.
Okay.
Why do you think that so many practitioners or researchers often fail to meaningfully engage stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. So something else that came is that a lot of participatory evaluations are more true in name than in practice. And so, yeah, it's something that came out in the research as well as how do we make this more deeper and more meaningful? Going back to that axis of depth of participation, how do we make it go beyond face value participation of, oh, we're asking community stakeholders these questions to include in our evaluation, to like involving them more deeply, but it requires a more concerted effort, and it requires the practitioners to really be more intentional in everything from how they go about initially designing the evaluation to how they engage with the stakeholders involved on a day-to-day basis. It also can require more time and financial resources from the organization, so I think you really have to be committed to those underlying principles in order to really exercise it in practice.